I'm doing it all right. All right, so let's do a clicker.
Question?
Yep. The tearing of the hymen, A, happens at birth. B, occurs when a woman has intercourse for the first time. C is abnormal for women under 18. Or D can occur for many reasons, including many non-sexual reasons. Go ahead and put your answer. Should be one more. Oh, there it is. Oh, that always looks so nice. Yep. It's for lots of reasons, including that penny horse. That just freaked me out. Ouch. All right. So breasts we're going to cover today and not next week, even though men and women have the same structure. The only difference is one thing. Anybody guess? Nope. Both have that.
I don't know how. Male gland? We got the glands. Women
Nope.
have
Men and women have the same exact glands in their breasts.
Really?
Yep.
Oh my God.
Tissues inside of it.
The what?
Tissues inside
Tissues. I heard fishes. I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
Nope. Nope. Well, kind of the answer. The one main difference.
Fatty tissues.
It's about how much fatty tissue we store there. So women tend to store more fatty tissue. Men tend to store less fatty tissue in their chest. That's it. That's the only difference.
So a man can produce milk?
That is correct.
Way.
Yes. So some men naturally produce this. We used to call it witch's milk, because the idea that it's really unnatural, but it naturally happens. So,
Oh my God.
um,
I'm going to die today.
I know. It's amazing the things we don't know, right?
Yeah.
I had a student who actually could do this. Only man I've ever met who could do this. And he handled it in the best way possible. He used it to torture his friends. He would like squirt it in his friend. He'd like, oh, I'm out. Like, I'm like, oh my God, I love you. That is wonderful. I love this. Yeah, best way to deal with that ever. So yeah, they're exactly the same. You can do the exact same things. And in fact, there is medication that if you're having trouble lactating, they can give you, and that will help it. Males can take this and lactate and feed their babies as well.
With the same amount of nutrients and everything.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that this has done is for trans women, has allowed them to breastfeed their children and have that experience. And so it's really interesting. It's been really cool what we're discovering. I know, mind blown, right? I love it. It's good stuff. All right, so I'm looking for a picture of not so like traditionally boob thing here, but that's what I got so far. So the outer ones, you probably know the names. What's the darkened area around the nipple?
Areola.
Areola.
There's a song by Tech Nine called Areolas.
Nice. I like it already. You have me at areolas. And here's our cross section. We're going to look inside, see all these different things. What do you think suspensory ligaments do?
Hold them up.
Hold them up. That's right. So what happens to these ligaments as we age?
Fall down.
They stretch, right? Is wearing a bra make them stretch less or more?
More.
Why more?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Because then it's holding it up, right?
Yeah, so what do my boobs not have to do?
Oh.
Stretch.
Well, they don't have to be
Well, they don't have to-
holding them up, right? They start to atrophy, which means the muscles become weaker and weaker and stretch more and more and more. So yeah, we've actually found Western women who wear bras most of the time actually have saggier breasts as we age than women who don't wear bras at all. You should right now, man. I have gone bra free for about 2 years now. It's wonderful. It's spectacular. Couldn't be better.
What about binders?
Binders have somewhat similar problems. They constrict a lot, especially right in here. Yeah, you've heard this one, huh? Yeah, you wouldn't wear them at night. Same thing with bras. You want to have as much time without them as you can. So as soon as you get home, taking those off. But You know, it's the same thing as bras. I understand why people do it, but if we can limit it as much as possible, the better. Yeah.
If you want
And
to-
binders are usually for a limited period of time too. I mean, some people don't get chest surgery and will wear binders most of their lives, but today that's not as usual. And so that's part of the problem with bras. It's over a lifetime of wearing them causing that problem. Yeah.
I was gonna say, if you wanna go braless, go get your nipples pierced.
Why?
Because you're not allowed to wear bras while
Oh.
with your what's called.
Okay. I think I could just go braless and I don't have to do that extra piece, but all right.
And that's what I've heard, because I've had friends that
Yeah.
have done that. And
I can see why. I mean, you wouldn't want a lot of pressure on them. That would be.
because they're not
that
even
could be
allowed to go
painful.
swimming with that stuff.
Yeah.
That's a separate topic.
Oh. Well, we'll talk about that too. We'll get into that. All right. So fatty tissue. That's what makes up boob size, breast size, and it's really genetics that make that difference. Also, fat. How much you weigh. Generally, as you gain weight, your breasts get bigger too. I've been trying for years. I haven't had any effect on them. I just keep getting fatter and nothing. It's made bralessness easier having small boobs. I've really enjoyed small boobs later on in life. But yeah, there's nothing you can do. I must increase my bust thing. No, it won't do anything. It actually makes the pecs bigger here. So in some ways, it actually creates an illusion of smaller breasts. If you look at women who are really like built, they actually look like they have smaller breasts because of those big muscles there. Yeah. You got what you got. The nipple has a lot of exposed nerve endings. We'll talk about it when I'll talk about it right now. So when the nipples are excited, when they are activated, they wrinkle up, right? They become smaller and harder. And that is the dartos muscle. So there's a muscle all around your areola that will do this. The same muscle, we're going to call it even the same muscle, on the scrotum. So when the male is excited, the same thing will happen. The muscle will crunch up, will wrinkle up, and elevate. It also deepens in color when sexually excited. What causes that? Blood. Yeah. Anytime we have sexual excitement, it means blood is flowing to that area. We'll talk about that too. I'll explain next week why you've made most of the bad decisions of your life. Yeah, I'll explain it in one short couple sentences. It's very exciting. All right, so the milk ducts are just ducts, like air ducts, right? It's not making the air, it's transporting the air from one place to another, right? Milk ducts are the same way. It doesn't create the milk, it transports it from one place out to the nipple. So it's just a passageway, so that's what these are supposed to be, are these little passageways. You can get blocked milk ducts, that's not unusual, especially if the baby isn't quite as, yeah, do you have that? It's so normal, right? Did you do a suction thing, or was the baby able to get it out? The baby able. Yeah, usually because they get frustrated, they want that milk, so they'll really suck it out. Yeah, it's so gross. Like the whole human body's gross, right? But it's truly amazing. It's truly amazing what our bodies can do. And remember, men have the exact same structures, exact same things going on in their breasts or in their chest. All right. So what actually makes the milk? Oh, not that. We'll talk about that. Come back. The alveoli, which sounds like a delicious Italian dish. Right? Some alveoli, pesto. I'm so glad you knew that. Yeah. So all it really means is little structures that fill with stuff. So in the lungs, they fill with air. In the breast, they fill with milk. Right? If you're lactating. So for most of us, they're not filled if we're not lactating, right? So they're just empty. Just like if I breathe out all the air, the alveoli in my lungs would be empty as well. Except I can't wait that long until I breathe in again. Till it again. So it starts in here, right? It's created in here, goes along the milk ducts and through the nipple. So let's talk about nipple piercings for a second. Most people who do nipple piercings will tell you if you are planning on breastfeeding later on, do not have them done. Wait. They can impede breastfeeding. There are two things can happen. Because remember, you're making like a new passageway, right? And it's also blocking out all the other things. So it can be where you completely block the milk ducts and no milk can get out because that has been walled off. Or it goes like this, which happens too. And it can happen no matter what, right? It has a life of its own. But it happens even more so when there's nipple piercings. So it's just something to keep in mind, like later on, can pierce away, but you might want to wait a little bit. Trans men, if they are planning to have babies, we really didn't talk about trans people having babies after transition, and we are now, this is good. There are surgeries where you can actually keep the alveoli and still have chest surgery, where lactation is still possible. Most are not like that, so you actually have to talk to your doctor about, I want to be able to breastfeed later on. I have a friend who now has 2 children who's a trans man, and that is his biggest regret, is he didn't know that when he had chest surgery and wished he was able to save those ducts so that he could have had that experience. So yeah, it's really interesting. I just love that we understand so much more about biology. So a lot of people ask me questions about breast augmentation. I am not promoting it. I am not saying it's good or bad. I'm going to talk about it because I get a lot of questions about it. So there are a couple of different ways that we do breast augmentation. Back to these ribs and chest wall piece. Is from here you can kind of see this one is within the chest wall. So that is, our largest muscles are in our chest. And what they have to do is cut that muscle in order to put the implant under it. This is much more painful, it takes longer to recover, but the idea is it looks more natural. You may have seen people who you can see their implant. That's this one.
Okay.
This is above the chest wall. It doesn't take as much recovery time, but a lot of people say it looks less natural, that you can, some I've actually seen, you can see like a little ridge, yeah. And that's that. Usually they've traveled up a little bit for that to happen, but that's something that can also happen with implants, is they can travel. So they can also leak, which is why we have made sure now, today, that there is nothing dangerous in them. We have put other things in them in the past, and then had that like silicone leak all over in people's bodies. Today it's usually saline. It can be a hardened form of saline or a semi-hard form of saline, but we want, just nothing. If it pops, we don't want anything to harm you. So that has changed quite a lot. Questions?
When you have an implant, you can breastfeed?
Yes, you can breastfeed. There can be problems with it, but you can see most of the glands and everything aren't being affected. What can happen is infections can cause problems, and that can make this malfunction. Yeah, the glands themselves malfunction. Any other questions? Yeah?
When they do breast reduction surgery, is it typically just removing fat?
It depends on the thing, but yeah, if it's just a size issue, yes, but they do have to remove some glands too. They'll usually do it. It's a much more invasive procedure. Like they usually have to remove the entire nipple, replace the nipple, they put it in a different spot. There's usually a lot of scarring underneath as well as up to the nipple there'll be scars. And so you're just doing a lot more cutting. But yeah, they depending on the size of the breast too, they may have to take some of the mammary glands, which should make a big difference as long as you're not taking all of them. But most people who are doing breast reduction have had the babies that they're going to have. Because yeah, don't do it before because they're going to get enormous again, and then you're just yawning. And then that gets rid of the problem because for some women after birth their breasts stay fairly large. For some women their breasts become smaller after breastfeeding. Some women don't see any change at all. So any kind of surgery you would want to do after kids.
Question.
Yeah.
Why when you are growing up,
No.
sorry everybody.
We're gonna share. Let's hear it.
Yeah, because I remember when I was growing up and I started to have the breast,
Mm-hmm.
my nipples hurt me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
A lot at the extreme that sometimes if I touch it, I throw up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, they were really sensitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Was
hormones.
sensitive?
It's hormones. Sometimes when we're menstruating or about to menstruate, you'll get the same thing. This pregnancy, we'll often do it, like especially in the very beginnings of pregnancy.
Mhm.
It's hormones. Yeah, it's all affecting every part of our body, really. Yeah, we'll talk about hormones. They're so much more powerful than I ever gave them credit for. They're powerful stuff. But yeah, that's the correlation. Now the hormones are doing something to create that. That I couldn't tell you. But it's the hormones that are the emphasis of that, not emphasis of make it happen.
So it's nothing in the structure of the breast. It's nothing in the structure of
No.
the breast.
No.
How does growing up?
Yeah, because you're getting so inundated by hormones, right? You're getting so much so quickly, your body isn't used to it. So that's why, especially at the very beginning, same thing with pregnancy. At the very beginning,
Yes.
it's very hard on our body, and your body's trying to get used to it. And after a while, our bodies just can't keep up the same reaction to stimuli. So even if our breasts are still sensitive, our brain will start to ignore it
Mhm.
because it becomes too much for us to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so let's start talking about what's going on the inside. In terms of reproductive function. We'll talk more about the sexual function next time. So we're going to break this down into two cycles, the ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle, and then we'll put them together. What are we going to focus on here? What does ovarian mean?
Ovaries.
Ovaries. All about the eggs. One of my favorite words, I just like words. Oogenesis, egg beginning. So this is when we start producing eggs, which is happening before birth, right? So our oogenesis is very, very early on. But then at puberty, we will start to get a true oogenesis because then they will actually become fertilized or able to be fertilized eggs. So immature eggs don't do us any good. They have to become mature. Even when we're harvesting eggs, meaning, let's say I want to become pregnant 20 years from now. They can take my eggs, put them in a freezer, you know what I mean, and put them back in my body and be as good as new. But those eggs have to be mature eggs. So they have to give me a bunch of medication to mature the eggs to then harvest them. Does that make sense?
So the egg is going to be at the same age like when you take it off of your body?
Right. Yeah, at my age, it wouldn't be worth taking my eggs.
No,
like,
I mean-
you're old and dusty now, but yes, if I was like 20 years old or 30 even,
Yeah.
then yeah, I'd harvest my eggs and then my eggs would stay that same age. And what they actually do is they allow those eggs to develop, well, it depends. If it's just harvesting my eggs, then they just put them away. If I have a male partner or I have whatever, then they'll put them together, make sure that they're actually viable, they'll let them grow for a little bit, and then take the ones that are actually doing well and freeze them.
Fertilized
Yes,
already?
yes. Well, that's if I'm doing IVF. We'll get to this
Oh.
though, we'll talk
Oh,
about
okay.
this, yeah, yeah. And that's an in vitro, there we go, in vitro, I kept trying to put an R in there.
Okay.
In vitro fertilization. All right, so with the ovarian cycle, we're going to start with the follicular phase. So the follicular is that immature egg. And so the hormones stimulate these ovarian follicles, and that's all those little immature eggs, and about 10 to 20 of them start to grow. The idea is that we want backups, right? So if not all of them grow properly, then we want to get the ones that are growing really, really well to minimize how many miscarriages and issues from the baby. Then in the ovulatory phase, the oocyte, another one of my favorite words. If you ever play Words with Friends, it's a good one. 2 O's, a C, and a Y, right? That's a good word. Is released and enters the fallopian tube. That 1 or 2, depending, are found to be the best, the biggest, and they are released. The fimbriae starts to do its little finger thing, and it starts to travel down the fallopian tube. In the luteal phase, so the follicle surrounds the egg. And in the ovulatory phase, the follicle kind of pops open and the egg comes out. In the luteal phase, that shell can do 2 things. It can either just be absorbed by the body, or it becomes a corpus luteum, which just means yellowish body, and starts to secrete the hormones that we pick up with things like pregnancy tests. So this is a good 2 weeks after this has occurred, right? After the egg has actually been released, is that corpus luteum saying, it's getting a signal from the body saying, yes, there's a viable egg in the uterus, and so it creates these hormones to help that egg. We don't know exactly how it talks to the egg, how it makes this connection, what's happening that triggers this, that we're still a little unsure about. But we do know that it does communicate somehow.
So is it only in the 2nd and 3rd phase that you can become pregnant, or can it start in the follicular phase?
Let's put everything together and then we can talk about that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because I think it makes more sense when we have them both strewn out, because then it gives us timeline too. So let's hold off, and then we'll look at that. I do want to add this because it's just one of my favorite words. I love this word. Hadn't heard it until a couple of years ago. It's during this time. So for some people, they can actually feel this happen. That their egg being released, they feel a little pop. I have never experienced this, but what I love is there's a name for it, and it's called Mittelschmerz pain. You can't tell me that's not a fun word. Mittelschmerz. It's like something from a deli. And it means middle pain. So yeah, some women actually have that sensation, know when their egg is being released. I find that amazing. It's awesome. Then you can just say, oh, that's my middle schmerz pain again. I just want you to drop this into like a casual conversation. All right. Oh, this continues to pump out hormones until the placenta is created. So this is the main pregnancy hormone generator until something can be placed that's a little more permanent. All right, but let's look at let's look at film real quick. This again is not a film. This is not them filming the inside of the body. It would be amazing if it was. This is a computer-generated mock-up, but it's supposed to look like we're inside the body and following the egg around, and they do a pretty good job. So hopefully this will make a little more sense than maybe I just made. And if not, it gives nice, pretty visual.
Ovulation is a part of the menstrual cycle when the ovum releases a ripe egg, or ovum. Inside the ovary are hundreds of thousands of follicles. Each follicle is a hollow ball of cells with an immature egg in the center. The typical 28-day menstrual cycle begins on the first day of menstrual bleeding. During the first 7 days of the cycle, a few follicles begin to grow at the same time. These maturing follicles secrete estrogen hormone into the bloodstream to prepare the lining of the uterus for pregnancy. Around day 7, all of the follicles stop growing and begin to degenerate, except for one. This dominant follicle continues to grow and nourishes the developing egg inside it. Around day 12, the follicle secretes a large amount of estrogen into the bloodstream. When the estrogen reaches the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland in the brain, the anterior or front part of the pituitary gland releases a huge surge of luteinizing hormone into the bloodstream. Around day 14, luteinizing hormone causes the follicle to undergo a sudden growth spurt. Right before ovulation, the egg detaches from the inside of the follicle. The bulging follicle releases chemicals, causing one of the two fallopian tubes to move in closer and surround the follicle. The follicle swells until it bursts open, ejecting the egg and fluid from the follicle into the abdominal cavity. In response, the fimbriae, tiny projections at the end of the fallopian tube, sweep across the ovulation site and pick up the egg. Microscopic cilia on the fimbriae surface transport the egg to the entrance of the fallopian tube. Inside the walls of the fallopian tube, muscular contractions gently push the egg towards the uterus. After ovulation, the egg lives for 12 to 24 hours, so it must be fertilized by a sperm from the male during this time for a woman to become pregnant. If it's not fertilized, the egg dissolves away and is shed along with the uterine lining during menstruation.
How'd that feel?
Technical.
Technical, yeah, very technical. Did it help actually seeing it? Like in terms of like seeing it come out of that follicle? Seeing that fimbriae looked creepy, didn't it? Like that would make a good horror movie. But like I said, it's the same thing we just talked about, just in a visual. So hopefully one of the two sat well with you. All right, well, let's look at the menstrual cycle. So this is just looking at the uterus. We're going to put a picture of the moon up there. The moon is that
Each month,
the what?
is that each month?
Each month, yep. So a little bit of trivia again. We are the only monkeys that have the same cycle as the moon. Others of our brethren have shorter or longer periods. One theory, there's a book called Sex, Time, and Power, and it looked at this idea that perhaps the reason that we evolved was actually because we matched the moon cycle. The reason being is that, at least this is what the book said, was that it gave us a sense of the future, and so we could do planning. So things like even planning for seasons and planning for those, we could do future thought, all because we synced up with the moon. I don't know, they sound like a good idea from the book, but I have no idea if there's any good evidence for it. But it is interesting that we are the only ones who have that same cycle. So it is a 28-day cycle. Some women have longer cycles, some have not fewer, but shorter, that's what I'm looking for, shorter cycles. It all just depends on your body. Every body is different. So 3 phases to this as well. First is the menstrual phase, that's what they said in the film as well, was first day of your cycle is always considered the first day of bleeding. So that makes sure that we're all starting at the same place, right? Because women can bleed for a few days to a few weeks. It really depends on the person. But we all start it, at least, if you're having a period. So we'll start day 1, making that the menstrual phase, and so we start to shed that endometrium. The way I like to think about it is let's imagine that we blew paint into a balloon. Right? Just put a bunch of paint in our mouth and blew it up and put air in it and blew it into the balloon, right? And covered the inside of the balloon with paint. What would be the best way to get that paint off once you've left it for a few weeks? It's all dry. We don't want to pop it. We just want to get the paint off of it.
Inside the balloon?
Yeah.
I got water too?
Yeah, I was gonna say with water.
No, we keep it closed.
Would it be like squish it around and then it would crumble off?
Yeah, contract it, right? So if you squish it, then the paint chips off, right, and it falls off. And that's exactly what your uterus is doing. It is contracting and making that endometrium come off. So what does this feel like? That's the cramps, right? So for some people, they have a lot of cramps. It's really hard to get that endometrium off, right? Your uterus keeps cramping. For some, few cramps, that's it, done, everything's fine, right? Totally depends on the person. And age can change how you're experiencing it as well. In the proliferative phase, that just means you're doing a lot of stuff. And in this case, we're going to build that endometrium back up, right? Because sperm can get through there better when there's a thick endometrium, right? They have to go all the way through the uterus and up to those fallopian tubes, so they got a while. We'll talk about other changes that happen during that time as well, to your vaginal fluids. But we'll get to that. And then the secretory phase is the endometrium prepares for arrival of the fertilized ovum, meaning it's at thickest, right? At this point, the egg, the fertilized egg, would already be on its way down so that it can nestle in that endometrium because that's where it wants to live. That's where it gets all its nutrients. So that's why I want it its thickest. But if there's no fertilized egg, what happens? Or not a fertilized egg that the body recognizes? Sheds again. Yep, goes back to phase one, right? The menstrual phase. Most women, if they've been heterosexually active, have been pregnant at least once in their life. Most pregnancies are lost before this even happens. It's a weird thing to think about, but that's how life works. Oh, ovum just means egg as well. Ovum is the singular. Ova is the plural. Best Scrabble word ever. I've used that so many times because you can put Nova in front of it too. Lots of it. Yeah, it's good. Trust me. You always see it coming either. All right, so let's put them all together. And this is when we're going to talk about when pregnancy can occur. So we're not going to worry about the hormones. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on in the semester when we get to pregnancy. So here's the ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle put together. So this is supposed to look like how much your endometrium has built up, and this is just looking at the follicular, right, as well as the ovum inside of it. So if we're starting day one, right, menses, first menses, so starting to bleed, get rid of that endometrium, right? So for first few days of bleeding would get rid of most of that. And the follicle is still working on maturing that egg. So about 2 weeks later, from the very beginning of menstruation, we're going to see a released ovum. So about halfway through the cycle, we see fertility happening. How long does that egg last? Remember?
12 to 24 hours.
12 to 24 hours. So you have a fairly short period. However, I was just reading this article, fascinating stuff. We'll talk later about sperm. Sperm we thought lasted about 3 days. We're finding out it can last up to 10. 10 days in your body. 10 days. So that means 10 days before you ovulate. It's a weird thought, right? 10 days before you ovulate, you have sex, and that sperm can still be around to get to that ovum. That's crazy. Which is why we're going to talk about the rhythm method being utter crap. right? Because the rhythm method is, I'm not gonna have sex the times that I can get pregnant. But if it's a 10-day period, that changes everything. Yeah, fascinating stuff. So halfway through the cycle, the ovum is released, but where is this ovum? Or this ova? Where? In the fallopian tube. So it takes a while for it to get down, which is why we still have some room to grow here, right? It's not at its highest when the egg is actually released. It needs a week or so to actually get down the fallopian tube, meet with the sperm, fertilize, and then go into the uterus. So this is the corpus luteum, right? Once it's released if it gets that signal, yep, it's been fertilized, then that turns into this yellowish body and starts pumping out hormones. How does this feel? Yeah.
Okay, so this is totally random, but
I love it.
My stepmom has a theory about me because I'm trans, that she thinks that I was born naturally with more testosterone than the average female. And
Okay.
since I have such inconsistent periods, like I'll go 2 to 3 months without it, and then it'll last like 3 days maybe. She thinks that because of my higher testosterone, that is what causes my random periods. And I didn't know how that related at all.
There is some truth to her theory, but it's going to come at 12 weeks of development in the womb.
Okay.
Yeah. Because that's when we get our second switch. Right? The first switch is at 6 weeks, and it tells our body how to develop. We're understanding now that we get another one at 12 weeks that gives us our neurogender. So it tells our brain how to develop. And so if I'm getting different switches, if I get a bath of testosterone for some reason, and actually lots of things can cause that. We create testosterone and estrogen at will in our bodies. But maybe I get this big bath of it, and my body thinks that that's a signal to develop my neurogender as male. That can absolutely cause me to be transgender. When it comes to hormones now, probably not. There are many cis women who have irregular periods. So many. PCOS may be an issue, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. It means that when your eggs are starting to develop, they become encased in a mucus, and they don't actually develop. They don't go out. And it is hormone based. So that causes really irregular periods. Very, very common thing to find, especially today. So that might be something you could get tested for too, and say, is there a chance that I have PCOS? But that easily causes irregular periods. But even like stress and youth and lots of other things can cause that too. But I like where your mom's going with things. Is there? No? Okay. Any other questions or random comments? I like it. All right. Cool.
One. Is
Yes.
it possible to get pregnant while you're menstruating?
So, you remember Jurassic Park? I have a tendency to quote them a lot. Life will find a way. Generally, no, right? Generally, you know you're not supposed to be able to get pregnant if you're menstruating. That's at a totally wrong period of time. But we can get pregnant with IUDs that are in our bodies specifically trying to get us not pregnant. People can get pregnant on birth control. People can get pregnant in so many different ways. But not even having penetration. That sperm just gets in, around the vulva and finds its way in. I mean, it's amazing how much life can find a way. So that's the problem with the rhythm method, is maybe your body is like randomly putting out an egg for some reason at that period. Normally wouldn't make a difference, but it happened to find a sperm and happened to have just enough endometrium by the time it gets there to take hold. I'm amazed at two things at all times. I'm amazed at how anybody is ever born, because all the things that have to happen for that to go. And I'm amazed that people aren't born more because it's so easy in some ways to get pregnant. Yeah. All so let's talk about how we view this menstruation. What are our thoughts about it? Which camp are we in the United States here? Are we in the more the unclean camp or more the life-giving camp?
Unclean.
Unclean, yeah. Yeah, usually we see it as pretty gross, right? Why would people see it as life-giving?
Because it's cleansing you,
For
giving you a new.
uterine lining? Why are we doing this? Whole menstruation thing. For babies, yes. And so if we didn't menstruate, we couldn't have babies, right? So it's really, really tied to this continuation of our species. That if we didn't have this, we would fail as a species. So it is the most important thing, right? But that doesn't mean every culture has accepted that. In some cultures, well, we still see this in some cultures, but in some cultures it's seen as so unclean that women who are menstruating need to be away from other people. Anybody read Leviticus in the Old Testament? It's good stuff, right? Good stuff. What I like is the rest of Leviticus. There's a few passages that lots of people like to quote, but look at the rest. It's a great party game. Just pull it out, just start reading stuff. You'll have a great time. Because one of the things that I will say in there is the kinds of animals you have to sacrifice if you're on your period. You also have to sacrifice animals when you give birth. More animals if it's a girl than a boy, because girls are more unclean than boys. It also says things like you can't go over water. Like if a woman who is menstruating goes over water, you can't drink that water because now it's tainted. It's pretty fun stuff, right? So they would put women in what we call menstrual huts. So the idea was they would be far from the village, and they could come back when they stopped bleeding. Right? What's the problem with that?
That's unclean.
Yeah, there was a lot of cleanliness issues in those huts. What else? Why safety?
Because I'm guessing all the men are away.
They are.
And not that the women can't protect themselves, but
But they're not given a lot of training or weapons either. So who are we in danger from?
other, I don't know, other tribes or.
Yeah, so other tribes, that was a very easy place. And animals, yeah. So both of those became, it can be a very dangerous place to be. I imagine it like, a nice little fur-lined hut where people bring you drinks, and right? That would be nice. Burning Man, I heard, has that. They have like what menstrual huts should be like, where people give you massages and just tell you how wonderful your uterus is. And I want that. But that's not what this was. This was a lot not as nice as this. I would like it to be. This is an old menstrual hut, so this used to be a menstrual hut. So we still see vestiges of this around the world. How are we excited to start our periods, ladies? First time? Monarchy, that's first period? Yeah, kind of, sort of. Scared?
I thought an actual hole was gonna open in my stomach.
Really?
Yeah. Like I was gonna get this like.
Sex ed should be required, right? Because we have so many weird ideas about what's gonna happen.
Like pads, I thought there would be like bandages, like how you wrap around, like
Sure. Well, yeah, that would be terrifying.
Oh, I was just gonna say, for my first period, I didn't tell anyone for the whole day, and so like it was blood into my pants. So I just didn't want to tell anyone.
Yeah, nothing like adding a little bit of social humiliation, right, to it all as well. Yeah. There's some women who there's kind of a movement of free bleeding, where you don't wear anything, you just bleed under your clothes. And there's been a few athletes who have run their races and done their things free bleeding, and kind of to show I can still do stuff and be on my period. Like, this isn't a huge deal.
Right.
It's a little bit of blood. I am a woman. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Mine was more for shame.
Yes, oh, I get that. But you could re-script it, right? You're like, it was a statement.
I do this, whatever.
Are our families generally get us excited about this experience?
I'm the youngest of, I guess another 4 big sisters. So when I got my parents, they danced like around me.
Aww, that's awesome. I love that. No, you weren't excited? You didn't like that?
I was 10 years old, and I was so scared because I don't understand nothing what was happening. But they was dancing.
They were excited. Aww. I actually have a somewhat similar experience in that the people who were trying to do nice things for me, I didn't appreciate at the time. I come from Upper Canada, and so there were two schools of thought in the community that I lived in. One was the Western view of it's unclean, it's gross, and the other was the Native view of that it's life-giving, it's amazing, it's wonderful. My family was adopted into the Native tribe, in the Haida tribe, and so I grew up mostly around Native kids and other Native people. And so this was really what I heard the most. But that didn't mean that television and all those other influences weren't pretty strong. So my father was really excited one day, and he would talk to me about sex all the time because he really wanted me to just understand it. And which I found humiliating and awful, by the way. I hated that every moment. It's like ironic now that I do it for a living. And he said, when you have your first menstruation, we'll have a party. We'll have this huge party. I'm going to come and give you stuff. And I didn't tell anyone for a year. I was like, there is no way that is happening. I am not okay with that. I do not want you to have a party. I don't want anybody to. You're like, no! Because I had that. It's gross. It's so gross, and I don't want anybody. This is no. I can't. Yeah. So this really does impact our experience, right? And I am glad to see that we're starting to embrace this a little bit more. I've seen more of like menstruation parties. When girls have their first menstruation, they get a party. You may have seen like the fake one, like this kid puts, what is it, fingernail polish on her pad. Did you see that one? And the mom's like, okay, I'll throw you a party.
Yeah.
Do you want to like get out of school or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know that had like glitter in it?
That's right. Use glitter polish. I forgot about that part. So yeah, we are highly affected by this.